Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the Space for Faith podcast, where we are having conversations to reimagine the church for our current moment. My name is Mike Goldsworthy, and I get to host these great conversations with folks who are trying to wrestle through what it takes seriously, the idea that we are a part of a rooted faith, that we don't get to make this thing up, it is handed down to us, and at the same time, we are taking this rooted faith and we're reimagining it. We're reimagining what does it look like to live this thing out in our day, in our time, and that these are people who are doing that in all sorts of different ways, who see some different ways forward, who are holding different kinds of tension, but that are trying to do both of those things simultaneously. So I'm so glad that you are with us, and that maybe is in some sort of way the part of your journey as well that you're having. And we've got a great conversation today with actually a seminary president. We're going to have a few seminary conversations coming up because some of these folks are on the front lines of this, of trying to figure out and trying to live out, and are ahead of some of us on actually living out this sort of tension of a rooted and reimagined faith. And so excited for you to get to meet my friend Dan Lowery in just a few minutes. But before we get there, a couple of things to keep you updated on. I know a bunch of you are coming out to Denver with us in October 11th and 12th for our post-evangelical collective. It will be so good to see so many of you, where we have pastors and artists and other church leaders who are reimagining the church for our current moment. And so we'll gather together at Denver Community Church. We will hang out for a couple of days. We've got some great folks sharing just a few brief thoughts. So people like the ethicist David Gushee, the pastor and incredible speaker Gail Song Bantam, the historian and leader of Faith and Justice Network, Peter Choi, some great folks like that. And we've got these great workshops as well, like Meredith Miller and Sarah Swartzendruber, talking really practically about how do we do children's ministry in this space? What does that look like? We've got a gun violence prevention conversation and actually workshop for folks that have been leading that conversation in churches. How does our church engage in this? Well, we've got things about leadership wellness and how do you take care of yourself well, and then how do you dismantle toxic leadership and make sure that the kind of leadership that you're creating in your church isn't creating a toxic sort of structure, and how do you have a better way forward? So great workshops, and then lots of space also to have conversations, lots of space to interact, lots of space to not just sit and receive content, but to interact with each other. So it's going to be a great couple of days. If you haven't registered yet, there is information on my website, mikegoldsworthy.com. Would love to have you there. Then, secondly, I want to let you know that I have been partnering with Logos, or Logos, depending on who was your Greek teacher. And if you don't know Logos, they are a great Bible software program. I've been using it on my Mac for quite a long time. My guess is probably 15 or so years I have been using it as a great tool and aid for when I'm doing research, for when I'm writing sermons. It is open every single time I write a sermon, when I'm just doing my own sort of personal study. And I continue to build collections of resources there, and it's a great tool that I can access on my phone, on my iPad, all of that. Anyways, we're partnering with them. You can get discounts by buying through a link that not only gives you a discount in buying the program, but it also then helps to support me and my work. And so if you want to do that, the website you can use is logos.com, Logos, logos.com/space for faith, all one word, logos.com/space for faith. And then finally, I have put up on my website on mikegoldsworthy.com a list of ways that I have been working with and partnering with churches and nonprofits and other organizations and individuals, leaders really, over the last few years. And if there's some sort of way I could partner with you and be helpful for you, I'd love to do that. So you can check that out on mikegoldsworthy.com, and I would love to get connected and have a conversation if you just want to talk about what that might look like. So that has been like 5 minutes of commercials. I apologize for that. Maybe you've skipped over it all, but we're going to jump into this great conversation now with my friend Dan Lowery, who is the president of Pillar Seminary. Well, friends, I'm excited for you to get to meet a friend of mine named Dan Lowery, and Dan is the president of Pillar Seminary. And Dan, we've been getting to know each other over the last several months, really over Zoom for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to first meet briefly at the gathering that we had in South Bend last October. And then we've gotten to connect and gotten to hear a bit about the work that you're doing. So thanks for making time to be with me today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I would love to start with giving people a little bit of a picture of kind of like of who you are and how you got to be to the point of seminary president, because I assume if you're the seminary president that you're the most spiritual and also the most intellectual person. So you've got the combination of those two for that. So like, what was the road that got you to that point?
Yeah, well, I guess, first of all, that was me laughing in the background at what you were saying. I think my story is one that it feels like, and basically from adulthood on, of the Lord dragging me into various vocations that I didn't really think I was fit for or even wanted to do. And away from the things I thought I wanted to do. And the presidency here is no different. I think I have mentioned some of this before to you, but I started out thinking towards the end of seminary, my seminary career, that I would go into teaching. I went and pursued a doctorate in biblical studies and Near Eastern studies, and then couldn't find a teaching job anywhere. I found some temporary appointments, but no permanent thing. And the Lord dragged me back to the church where I served as a seminarian to serve as a senior pastor. And it was some number of years that it took to finally become content and, sad to say, fall in love with the church and meet Jesus afresh in a way that I never had before, and really come to understand what all of life and ministry is about, is following Jesus and equipping others to do the same. So that began, I suppose, a long journey towards where we are now. I was asked to teach New Testament classes with an Old Testament degree some number of years ago for Pillar Seminary by a friend of mine, Dr. Eric Smith, who founded, together with Dr. Scott Booth, the seminary. And in a real similar sort of way, had to learn on the job and was struggling with imposter syndrome, teaching in areas that weren't my areas of expertise, certainly interest, but not expertise. And then Eric moved on a couple of years ago, and I was asked to assume his role. And it's a similar sort of, is nothing I ever planned for, nor really thought I would want, but here we are. This is where the Lord has me. And I'm still struggling with imposter syndrome, but finding the Lord here at work in wonderful ways, and ways that he is increasingly equipping me. And of course, I should say as well, the wonderful team that I have around me, with just a phenomenal board, wonderful faculty, wonderful staff. That really is all of this is a testament to the Lord's faithfulness.
I love that. Well, yeah, I want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing in a minute, but I'm remembering as you were just sharing that, like one of the things that I think, connected over early on was that idea of kind of being dragged into it. That was my story. I never wanted to go into ministry. That was not the plan for my life. Felt kind of called and compelled into it, stepped into it. And I thought I'd be a youth pastor for life. And I was only a youth pastor for a few years before getting called and dragged and pulled into another role, and then eventually becoming senior pastor, which was not on my life plan bucket list to be a senior pastor.
Yep.
I mean, I had lots of images of what that is and who that is, and that was not me. And I often identified with, I think it's Jeremiah 19, where the way that I understand it, and I don't like saying these things in front of an Old Testament scholar, because I probably have got it wrong.
Listen, let me assure you, I'm a generalist. That means I know a little bit about a lot of stuff. Go ahead.
Well,
You're safe
the
with
way that
me.
I understand the Hebrew of Jeremiah 19 is that it's essentially Jeremiah saying to God, "You seduced me."
Mm,
Like you seduced me into this, and
mm,
it's where Jeremiah is like, I try to shut up, I try to stop doing this thing, and your word is like a fire in my bones. I try to
mm.
contain it, and I can't. And but right before that, he's like, you seduced me into this thing, and
You
now
did this
look
to
at what
me.
it's gotten me. Yeah, you did this to
Yep.
me.
Yep. Oh man, that's true. I spent probably a decade in various kinds of ministry, roles of ministry like you did, and then left for PhD studies. And the one job I swore I'd never do was become a senior pastor. And here, there I went. So
Yeah, I
the
mean,
Lord
it's
has
so
a sense of
interesting.
humor.
Well, there is like a movement. There are some people who are like, in the same way there would be in any industry, that it's like, I want the top job, and that they're trying to build their resume or take the next stepping stone, whatever, to that. And then there's some of us are like, why the hell would we ever want to do that? Like, do you know what's
Yeah.
involved in that? Do you like,
Yeah.
um, and then here you are, like it's fascinating to me. The same thing is fascinating to me about somebody who goes into ministry who ends up leading a large organization, essentially, right? Like you, as a senior pastor, you become a CEO, and you're dealing with budgets, and you're dealing with administration stuff, and you're dealing with staff development. You're dealing with all these things that are not necessarily why you went into ministry. And I would imagine the same thing is true for somebody who gets their PhD in Near Eastern studies, and then ends up as the president of a seminary. That it was like, I just wanted to talk about these things that I find super interesting, and now I'm dealing with budgets and finding students and raising money and all of the and dealing with all the cultural like stuff that's going
Yeah.
on in the church right now.
Yeah.
Like, is that
It is not quite what I expected. And I'm reading through one, it's a handbook for seminary presidents, a real helpful resource compiled by various seminary presidents. And one essay really caught my attention with the phrase, you just die a thousand little deaths, and death to my academic dream and death to
huh?
my writing career. It seems like in order to be, I guess, born fresh from the soil here in this new vocation. And yeah, it's been a struggle to watch my field start to pass me by these last couple of years, and my own advancement in it is understandably taking a backseat to the new job and learning how to do things, and just settling into what the Lord's doing, and obviously has for me now in this moment. And so
Huh?
it's bittersweet, but here we are, and like I say, the Lord is obviously at work, and it's been real fun to try to keep up. So
I'm super curious for folks that are listening that are like maybe in some similar places, that it was like they had some dreams of like how they thought things were going to go, and they are feeling pulled maybe in another direction, or maybe they're even feeling stuck in another direction. Like, what is it
yeah,
that like there, I would imagine there's some sort of reason why you are willing to let those other things die, at least for a season. What is compelling to you about that?
well, it might speak to how unreflective I am as I make commitments,
Sure.
but no, I think the opportunity to be where the Lord is at work and really have a hand in participating or serving most effectively. That means I have been willing to learn my way into things. One frequent saying of my father is, "If it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly." And not a license for mediocrity. I'm sure he stole that from someone else, but really, this is just invaluable. What it is that I'm getting to do now as a part of this group of people who are doing this thing,
Yeah.
and it is worth doing before I become an expert. I don't know if I ever will become an expert, but to really just, I think that's what it is. Compelled by the opportunity to serve the Lord in ways that I feel are quite strategic and really opportune at this moment in American church history, as we were talking about before. The strategy of getting to pour into servant leaders in the church is a multiplicational strategy that I wasn't really able to participate in as a local church leader alone.
Hmm.
So I think that's some of what makes all of the the brutality of the learning curve more than worth it. I'm now able to have a hand in what the Lord's doing, training leaders all across the world. It's just incredible to think about.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind every time I think about it.
Well, so as you look at like the larger church landscape, Christian landscape at this moment in time, like what is it that's compelling to you about like, oh, what the work that I'm doing is so needed right now? Like what are you seeing? What are you noticing?
Well, more and more, I'm realizing I have no real understanding or grasp of all of the things that are going on around me.
Hmm.
It's just so much. It feels like accelerated change that, and the church I used to know. I think I share with you a general evangelical upbringing, and so those are my contexts. And the changes over the last number of years feel especially accelerated now. Just the landscape is changing, but maybe even more rapidly than it otherwise used to, I guess. And I think with that, there's in my context, uh, a sifting, a winnowing. It feels like a separation where well, this is the gathering and your collective that is addressing this as well, and a specifically response to the evangelical world. I think the sifting is a little bigger than that, though, at least in our country and our Western American context, as partisan politics comes to be infused in so much of religious expressions all across uh, conservative denominations, mainline denominations, Catholic, Orthodox. It really is just kind of overtaking a lot of what I feel like used to be more separate and distinct and set apart.
Hmm. Um, One of the things that I've been noticing, well, in my experience, I serve as an adjunct professor for mostly for ministry classes, and one of the things that we've seen happening over the last 15 years is a decrease of ministry majors,
Mm.
and it's an undergrad program. So, but we've seen a decrease of ministry majors in the last 15 years or so. But then coming out of the last, I don't know, since maybe 2015, 2016, one of the things that I've also noticed is a kind of like, why would I ever go into ministry like that? There's you're just going to get beat up. There's no winning there. It's just a sort of dead end experience. Are you seeing that same sort of decline of intentional vocational ministry pursuits?
It's hard not to import my own cynicism from my my ministry experience
Sure.
into answering that question. That has been my experience and the experience of fellow pastors in my circles. I don't know if I see it as much at our seminary level. We have
Yeah.
maybe a different slice of life that we serve a little more intentionally with our seminary. But I do believe that's a trend. I think the I'm often accused of being hyperbolic. So my hyperbole and cynicism here may make for an interesting conversation, but just the brutality of the office right now, especially with how much more fear and anger seems to be infused in what used to be gatherings for worship and the local representation of the body of Christ is just exhausting. And
Hmm.
and I understand some of that from my own experience, but can certainly then be able to empathize with more and more who are expressing a real exhaustion. And it's I think in many ways it's a job where we are, as everyone else is, called to put our crosses on our back and follow Jesus, abandon ourselves to follow Jesus wherever he leads. And so some of that does come with the territory, this sacrificial service, as Jesus calls everyone to, but it feels, it sounds like from a number of conversations, increasingly thankless.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get many cards for Pastor Appreciation Month.
I had it was a wonderful little church, I should say, where I served for a good number of years on and off, three times, three different stints at this church, and really loved the people and loved our time together. And our reasons for closing at the end of last year were unrelated to many of these sorts of things.
Mm.
And it was just time to close and time to deploy our disciple makers all around the Metroplex. But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful for it. I wouldn't trade any of it for the world,
Mm.
and I miss it. It's
Mm.
I still miss shepherding in a local church context as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that's really intriguing to me about you all is a really intentional ecumenical pursuit of trying to be a seminary that's pretty wide and broad in terms of like who you're trying to connect with, and even like I'd imagine then that filters into how you teach or the kinds of professors that you look for. Can you just talk a little bit about like what does it look like? Because one of the things obviously that's being talked about a ton is the fracturing of the church and churches moving into more and more echo chambers. And really, like one of the things that we saw during COVID was um, churches that had tried to walk some sort of like wide middle ground had a hard time based off of things like mask policies or like when they opened or didn't open. And so you saw
Yeah,
people or how they were talking about Black Lives Matter or
yeah.
things like that, how they were or weren't engaging in that work. And so you started to see people filter out to churches that were more progressive, more fundamentalist. And so it's really intriguing to me that you all are plotting a way forward, trying to hold a wide ecumenicism. So, yeah, I would love to just like hear a bit about how that's working for you.
Well, yeah. So again, it just a provisional statement that all of this is very much a work in progress, and much of this is aspirational. We aspire to be something beyond these factions and the factionalism that you're describing, with these kind of camps that are moving further and further away from one another. We ache for a body of Christ that is more reflective of the way things will be someday and ought to be now. And we are trying to do things about it, and we are working our way towards a reality that is more reflective of ecumenism. For example, we've made some recent faculty hires that I think are reflective of this ecumenical diversity. We have an Anglican priest, we have a Roman Catholic lay leader, we have mainline Protestant Methodist
Mm.
ministers, and then we have evangelical trained, and then also where they worship or serve faculty as well. And so far, it feels like the space is safe enough for that. We do anticipate some bumps along the way. It's not as easy to get folks to rally around. What do you stand for? That sort of question comes up a lot, and
Yeah.
we say, well, the Apostles' Creed is our statement of faith and our theological foundation and underpinning. So we're learning, and I think right now to us it seems the risk um, is worth this pursuit. I think I do speak for the board. I speak for faculty and staff and our student body that this is a good thing to be pursued for the sake of God's glory, and again to better reflect future reality and what ought to be now. But it's we're finding some it's difficult as
Yeah.
well. And so you had asked about how this gets reflected in the classroom context. I think we are being more generously ecumenical. Is one of our stated values to which we aspire, and it means that our classes are not concerned with depositing certain theological content in a niche or a denominational way, these distinctive ways. We have folks who inhabit all of these segments and sectors, from from Christ's body. And so we are very much more interested in um, helping students gain familiarity with the landscape and then providing them with tools to continue their training and learning well after they're done with us here. So a lot more how to learn than what to learn. I think
Yeah.
it has pushed it's as I was going to say, it pushes us in that direction, but that's the way we've been from the beginning. So it's just kind of where we find ourselves now.
Yeah, I love that. There are two things that I was reminded of as you were sharing that. There was when I felt called into ministry as an undergrad, I had to switch colleges because I was going to be an architect. And so, like, amazingly, architecture schools don't have ministry degrees. And so there was a handful of schools that I was looking at, and I remember going to one of them, and I read their statement of faith, and whatever. I was like 19 years old, but I was like, oh, I don't agree with this and this, like pretty arrogant and cocky. And so I asked the admissions counselor, I was like, hey, if I'm in a Bible class or a theology class, and I write a paper that disagrees with the statement of faith, but I can like show my work, how will I get graded? And they just straight up told me, they're like, yeah, you'll get an F. You need to be able to, and I didn't realize like how common that was. That sort of like,
Yeah.
no, you need to be able to show our beliefs, not your beliefs. And so that kind of thinking, I don't know, like, isn't necessarily as common as folks might think it would be or should be
Mm,
in the kind of spaces that you're
mm,
in, where it's like, hey, there's this wide landscape of Christian thought about this, and we want to expose you to it and help you learn to think about it. And I think I told you one of like a shifting point for me in my preaching was N.T. Wright had put out his big fat 2-volume work on Paul, and I bought it thinking that I would be a great theologian and read it. And then I got it and I looked at it and I put it up on my shelf and like didn't open it again because it was overwhelming.
yeah.
But then what he did was he wrote these like smaller books, like, like here's the one for dummies, and then here's the like so and so critiqued me, so I'm going to write a book critiquing them, which is what happens in the scholarly world, right? So I read those because they were much more accessible.
Yeah.
And he had this one phrase in there where he was talking about something about one of the lists that Paul gives in one of his letters, and he said, here's the problem is we read it as if Paul is telling us what to think about things, that here's the 5 things that you should never do, or here's the 5 things that you should do, whatever. And he says Paul wasn't telling people what to think, he was teaching them how to think. He was giving them examples to ignite their imagination for how to think messianically. Now that the Messiah has come, you've got new lens, and here's what that might look like. And this is meant to ignite your imagination, not to just simply be a list of what
Yeah.
to think.
Yeah.
And that was this like turning point for me on both like some of the way that I engaged, especially Pauline texts, but also in like how I thought about my role as a pastor. So I tell all of that like long little thing to like, I would be really curious how that begins to work itself out sort of like pragmatically, because I think it's a really noble aspiration. And it's a lot easier to do the other, to tell people what to think, than it is to like create context and space for how to think. Like what does that end up looking like?
Well, so I suppose most of our coursework on both our Bible and leadership side, which work hand in glove. I say hand in glove. It's the only 2 things we do is Bible and leadership, contextual leadership. And the Bible exists to undergird and support the leadership side, which is essentially more the capstone. The student we want to create is someone who's biblically fluent and capable of ministering in a diverse array of ministerial contexts, leadership contexts. And so we are interested to train towards a humility and generosity of spirit as we engage in biblical texts, recovering as best we can the ancient contexts and then the practice of trying to bring them into our current context. This works across our 2 departments. Where the rubber really meets the road is in our leadership, biblical contextual leadership side of things with Dr. Moore as a bishop in the Methodist Church. And he's got his hands full because this is where you practice and apply the sorts of skills that are necessary for a wide array of ministerial contexts uh, and uh, and different vocational roles as well, not only contexts, but roles. And he's got everything from folks who work from home with some other job to folks who are senior pastors and different churches. And he has taken an approach I think is really helpful and has certainly trickled down to the Bible side of things. He's trying to equip people with skills to solve problems, and to do so to practice doing so in the cohort and in community as folks work through things. He is teaching essentially problem solving and whatever your context is. And so just his approach to the leadership development side of things in our program is one that is removed from saying, do this, think this is how you answer this question. There's a real humility that he infuses into the problem solving context. And these things are practiced and worked out in community. These students move through our curriculum in what we hope are loosely related cohorts, more or less. You really do get to know and love and understand the folks that you move through with. And so they pour into each other as well, with Dr. Moore as the coach. We do
Hmm.
a similar thing with scripture on the Bible side. There are certainly things that we stand for and advocate for, but we are interested in teaching a methodological approach to scripture that is not unique to us. It's just how to be mindful of the context of scripture, and then how to read the different kinds of writing that we approach in scripture, and then how to then work out what it means in our own context. And we do that similarly to Dr. Moore, a step or two removed from this is what you need to do with this issue. So I'll get students who will ask questions as we're working our way through things. What does this mean about salvation? What does this mean about women in ministry? What does this mean about, pick your issue? And I'll say, well, we have students with several different opinions about these things, and here are the standard ways of having a conversation about that. And a conversation is what we must have. We can't just outright reject the other. And so here are some resources for you to begin your work in trying to figure out how to understand this issue and what sort of decision you'll make with the Spirit of God, presumably guiding you in your context with the people of God.
Hmm.
So
I I would imagine one thing that some folks might not understand who are listening to this is I would imagine that affects your funding because uh, because and I'll say this so that it's not coming from you, and you might not even be on board with this, so that we're clear that this is coming from me. One of the things that we're seeing several Christian colleges and seminaries do is move further and further right on having specific positions on things. And a lot of it has to do with funding. A lot of it has to do with, like, as you have as you create clarity around taking certain stances that align with certain religious right ideals, there's funding that's there. And if you instead say there's this wide berth of Christian understanding on this, and we're not going to, as a seminary, take a specific stand on those things, but instead encourage students on how to process that information in order to come to their own conclusions on that, I would imagine that that makes it incredibly difficult to fund an organization.
You know, yes, there's certainly a cynical side that sees things like this coming down the pike and acknowledges absolutely what you're saying is true. I do think, though, I find it an invigorating challenge to, as the president. I think some of this is my role as the chief cheerleader, the chief inspirer, to inspire people to the vision of God for the people of God, which is much more beautiful than some partisan or some factional group of people. And I find I'm quite compelled by this vision. of God for his body, his people, and I think we can find enough folks who are interested in this as well. Right now, I agree with your assessment. I think that it feels pretty stark and maybe bleak. I do think in the years to come, though, as whatever this is, the dust settles from it, I think there will be a more visceral understanding of the importance of this sort of ecumenism. I think there will be so few less of us that if you follow Jesus and you want to do so in this community, then by all means, come on in.
Hmm.
There are things that it feels like matter more fundamentally than others, and what we do, I feel obligated, and even I enjoy trying to coach people that we're engaging with, donors included, that we exist for something bigger and more beautiful than that. This vision of God is far more beautiful and compelling when you see how big the table is. And I do anticipate there will be bumps, and we'll probably, in my weaker moments, wish that we wouldn't have to keep slogging away at this. But we so far, it's been our experience. Now, I guess some of this is because our scale is so small. Our experience has been a really wonderful group of folks from a diverse array of backgrounds that have chosen to partner with us as we do this. We don't want just one side or the other. We want folks from all across the landscape to be in
Yeah.
the room together and to be attentive to each other's fears and hopes and needs, and to do this thing together.
I love that. I love that. Well, you all are doing stuff to not just you. I mean, you mentioned earlier that there's classes where you've got a senior pastor, but you've also got people that are not doing vocational ministry roles that I assume are interested in the kind of education that you get in a seminary that they're not necessarily getting in their church, that they're not getting through a sermon or through a Sunday school class by somebody who's maybe like teaching a Sunday school class who's well-meaning but just doesn't have the same sort of like
Yeah,
educational background to be able
yeah.
to delve into some of the stuff. Like, do you can you talk a little bit about like what's the stuff that you're doing to help engage a broader section, not just of theological vantage points, but also of kinds of people?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that we say often uh, is that we're reimagining seminary for anyone, anywhere. There are, as I've been told, I'm going to just spit these statistics out because they come from a board member, and he must be right. There are 30,000 seminary graduates every year, but 300 million professing believers in the U.S. And that's a way bigger target audience. That's a lot of people who I think you'll agree need to be equipped and need to be trained in ways that would really benefit the church. And so we're finding ourselves drawn towards, and our imaginations, I guess, provoked towards wondering how we can provide world-class seminary training for anyone, anywhere. And so one of the things that we've tried and begun to do and piloted, and it's just in its infancy, but we hope it's something that can really take off, is what we're calling lunchtime seminary, which is providing in a distilled manner something like seminary training that we bring to folks in the workplace. So we have what we've tried is 10 hours, 10 weeks, sorry, 10 weeks, 1 hour a week over a lunch break. And right now it's noon central. So, different time zones would be a little bit different. And really just getting to explore to a depth and degree that folks wouldn't otherwise, a particular subject, and whoever the faculty person's area of interest or expertise is. So, for example, I'm going to be teaching a class in the Gospel of Luke, a lunchtime seminary class coming up starting September 7th, Wednesdays, noon central. And it's going to be 10 weeks. And the background and context of the Gospel of Luke from the Old Testament and Second Temple period into Luke, and then we'll finish in Acts. And a real chance just to have human interaction with seminary professor and with other folks as you engage, hopefully more deeply, and become equipped to guide others to do the same. I think the goal is the same in our degree classroom and then in lunchtime seminary and any other initiatives is to make more capable and fully equipped disciples of Jesus. So that means equipped and obedient. These lives that respond to the God that folks are coming to know more deeply, and then able to guide others to be able to do the same.
I love that. I mean, my time in pastoring a church showed me like people really wanted more genuinely like more education. Like I thought sometimes, and I was guilty of doing this. Sometimes we would give people a hard time that they'd say something like your teaching's not deep enough or whatever. And that's a whole different conversation about preaching and the role of preaching and all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But one of the felt needs that was being expressed in that is that people are like, I actually want to learn more about the scriptures.
Yeah.
And we would do these. The church I was at was called Parkcrest, and so I called them Parkcrest School of Theology.
Mm.
And we would teach these like short-term classes that would be like the one that I always had the most people show up to was I would do a theology of Revelation for like 6 weeks, and
Of course.
that's
Yeah.
that's how you pack out the crowds.
There it is.
But like we would spend the first week like dismantling dispensational premillennialism, and then we would just kind of like we would walk through highlighted themes throughout Revelation. Anyways, like people were super engaged,
Yeah.
and it was always so much like it was fun for me because I was like, oh, this is fun stuff to get to talk about, and I
Right.
don't normally like this isn't stuff I get to talk about on a Sunday morning from the stage,
Yeah.
and it felt like oh, people want to engage in understanding more of the depth is a wrong word, but maybe understanding more contextually how to engage the scriptures, thoughtfully how to engage the
Yeah.
scriptures.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's wonderful, the thing that you did. And I think these sorts of things are going on in all kinds of churches across the world. Certainly here in the US, it tends to be a little better resourced church that can afford the time and
Yeah.
space, has the margin for that sort of thing, and the expertise, your level, and so on, to be able to offer these things in a meaningful way. We were here to serve churches. Not it sounds like we'll outsource that for you. You know, it's not that we would love to serve churches that are interested in this, that need this, folks in churches. We really think, like you say, this theological education is to come to know God more deeply, to have an opportunity in some space to know the God of the Scriptures more deeply, believe in Him more confidently, have your faith increased, and then to be equipped to serve and obey, more and more adequately. And so in that way, we're not doing anything to compete with churches, or we serve the church, we serve the local church, and hope to be able to reproduce the sorts of things that you're saying, offer this opportunity for more and more folks. And because
Hmm.
I think that's just a wonderful thing about being digital. There certainly are drawbacks. I have shaken your hand, but I haven't actually met face to face many of my students, whom I feel great affection for and feel like I've gotten to know quite well. But it is from a distance, and but that also does provide for some opportunities, remarkable opportunities that open up to be able to serve churches all over, all at the same time, and to bring people together in a room where we can all learn from each other. I think that's something that is really a feature of this digital learning space that we've tried to lean into, is real person-to-person communal engagement, not just some, read a book and write a paper and then email the professor. And all we do, we really are trying to lean in on this communal, shared learning sort of space.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So if somebody who's a part of a church and wants to learn more, or maybe even a pastor who feels a little bit undereducated in some areas and needs to like, because one of the things that was positive but also had some negatives in the movement of the church for the last 20 years is that there's been a lot of hiring from within in the church, which has been wonderful at like recognizing the church has these great gifted people within it to
Yeah.
help lead and serve, but they end up not having a level of biblical theological education that they are expected to be speaking on in some sort of way, or even like directing curriculum, or they're doing all
Right.
sorts of stuff.
Yep.
And they're doing it out of being a bit undereducated in this area. So like if they wanted to dip their toes in to this sort of stuff with doing like a lunchtime seminary, is that just like on your website? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. My director of development would be really mad if I didn't say pillarseminary.org
Yeah.
slash lunchtime seminary is
Okay.
where you can find us. We have a Pillar Equip pull down menu on our Pillar Seminary website that has lunchtime seminary. Really, though, I think it just depends on what sorts of training you're interested in. Our degree programs all feed into each other. And so everyone starts out the same and takes what we call our certificate courses, this foundational level of classes that move then into the MA and then further into the MDiv. And the certificate is 11 hours, and I think would be a wonderful option for folks to really dip their toes in deep
Hmm.
learning, seminary level learning. All of our degrees go through the certificate to get to the MA and the MDiv. And so that's another option for folks who want a little more. But yeah, lunchtime seminary it's just in the process of being built out. So we just taught a class on Book of Proverbs from Old Testament faculty member who this was her area of expertise, and now I'm doing the Gospel of Luke. So there's not really as many options yet, but
Sure.
it is like I think in keeping with our big table, a space if there is a market enough to justify doing this lunchtime seminary. What we hope to do is build it out and invite many other professors from all different uh, walks of life and denominations and theological inclinations to teach a course in their area of expertise. So it would be an opportunity for us to really have a big table and learn from all kinds of folks,
Hmm.
is what we hope, not just our people. So,
It's good. Um, well, Dan, a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are people who feel like the phrase that we've been using for a little while is feel ecclesiologically homeless,
mm,
not really sure where they fit in the church world anymore. Many of them are
mm,
pastors or other kinds of church leaders, and then a bunch of them are just, not just, but are folks who have a robust faith in Christ, and they're just like, I can't figure out where I fit in the church world anymore. I'd love, um, as somebody who is a seminary president, I'd love to, just as we wrap up, for you to offer some thoughts, some words. I don't know if you have some encouragement, a challenge, a questions that you're wrestling through,
yeah.
what you might say to that group of people who find themselves kind of in the space of like, I don't really know where I fit in the church anymore.
Yeah, I wish I could be more encouraging. I feel that way too.
Hmm.
Right now, I think that maybe we could end where we began. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. The people of God and the purposes of God through His people to redeem the world are so important that at least in our own families search for a new church, many of our preferences have taken a further backseat than we thought they would, as we find just the absolute importance of being a part of a local body and serving deeply and serving well. I I guess the words I could offer that I hope are encouraging is you're not alone. I think this is more and more normal. You're not doing it wrong if you feel more and more homeless. Of course, I'm not just trying to justify myself. I really do think this is a moment in the history of our church in America where this is happening. And so what you're feeling is legitimate. What you're going through is real and valid, and your sense of homelessness is justifiable in many ways. And I would encourage to do what we are trying to do as a family here, which is to try to find a place, even if it's not perfect, to commit to and to serve. I understand, though, my sense of homelessness is come about by far less violence than many others have this kind of invoked this feeling in others. And so church isn't a safe space for many, and justifiably so, again. So I'm not saying, swallow it and, just get over it and get back in the game. There's real pain and real trauma and real abuse and real hurt. So you're not alone. I have found myself to be greatly encouraged by the thing that you're doing here, Mike, and to just be able to associate with others who feel in the same way, that can understand my fears and doubts and anger and frustration. So I, I, I know this is the second year of the gathering, but hopefully get some stuff together here, bud, and and really take this thing a lot further, because what you're doing is a wonderful balm, I think, for the soul of many. It's a real need, and I've benefited from it and appreciate it so much.
That's really kind of you. Well, so it's pillarseminary.org. And Dan, you're such a gift. I'm really grateful for you. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm grateful that I've been getting to know you some.
Yeah.
And thanks for making some time today.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the invitation, and thanks for the conversation. That's always enriching. Look forward to the next time.